Welcome to the CodeBreaker Mindset, where leaders share the unwritten rules for success. I'm your host, Chitra Nawbatt. Joining us today is Herman Bulls, JLL's Vice Chairman of the Americas. Herman, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Chitra. I'm happy to be here today.
JLL, roughly $23 billion in revenue. Tell us about the company and how it's different than competitors like CBRE and Cushman & Wakefield.
Well, I'm going to start out by saying I started with the company when the revenue was about 25 million over 35 years ago. So the company has grown tremendously. And in terms of what sets us apart from others, it's really about the people. Okay? It's about setting a culture where the client and all of our stakeholders come first. Okay, and obviously the stakeholders, when we look at stakeholder capitalism, something I do from my board seats, and certainly there, we're talking about our employees, we're talking about the communities we live in, so our people are definitely involved locally and nationally in organizations. We talk about our suppliers. We have diversity programs, for example. We have women programs. We want to make sure that everyone's involved. And obviously, in the end, we've got to take care of our shareholders, and we've done a very good job of that as well.
Bring it to life for people in terms of what the company does, and you talked about different stakeholders there, what the company does and what do those outcomes look like?
Well, what we really do is we make beautiful places for people to live, work, play, and learn. And what that does is that creating environments where people can fulfill their needs, be the best that they can be, and we start by doing that with our own employees, and we create those conditions for our clients. And our clients, when the market is going gangbusters, they need a lot of space. When we're going into a recession, partly, which we may be doing now, they need to understand how is it that we control our occupancy costs and make sure we get people return to office and create that environment so that they can be the best to do. So what do? We provide specialized real estate in almost any category that you're looking out for. Talking about office, retail, something that's very, very hot now. Data centers, because we're going to talk about AI later. Takes a lot to do that. And we also hotels, okay? Then a part of the firm that I actually started, that is one of the fastest growing parts of the firm, is our public institutions group, which helps federal, state, local government, and colleges and universities with their real estate.
You talked about joining the firm 35 years ago when it was at $25 million in revenue. Let's talk a little bit about your journey on how you got there, because you started in the Army, did a little bit of time in the Pentagon, were a professor at West Point. You also sit on 3 public company boards, Influence Energy, Host Hotels, Comfort Systems. So talk a little bit about your journey on how you got to JLL.
Well, it started in Florence, Alabama, believe it or not, when it was time to graduate from high school. Kid of the 60s down in Alabama, predominantly white school, 16% black, and I was fortunate enough to not only be the starting quarterback, which was very, very unusual back then, but I was also president of the student council. Had an opportunity to do a lot of things, chose to go to West Point, took the challenge at West Point. And from there, had some of my greatest heroics in life and had some of my greatest disappointments that we'll talk about later. Then after West Point, joined the Army, had a very good career. So they sent me actually to Harvard Business School for an MBA, went back to West Point and taught. And after doing that, went to the Pentagon for a couple of years, and then decided that I wanted to do real estate that I learned about at Harvard. And that's when I went and joined JLL.
And 35 years,
35
how
years later.
How did you navigate to being a vice chairman?
Well, you know, I was very fortunate.
That's a pretty big title.
Yeah. I was very fortunate that I've been entrepreneurial my entire life, and I started out in our development group, which is very entrepreneurial because you've got to make decisions in terms of bringing what the client and the market needs, with the financing sources, with the construction sources, with the governmental sources to get all the permits and everything. So it's a great job, and I did that for about 1.5 years. Then I went into our investment management area, where one of the largest parts of our company as well, where we work with sovereign wealth funds, pension funds. We have about $80 billion worth of capital that we manage on their behalf by investing in real estate. And then I had this idea that public real estate had not been really treated professionally. So I started this public institutions group with my first assignment working with the General Services Administration right here in Washington, D.C. And that has grown to be a phenomenally successful, and I really love giving back. And this is a way where you can do good and do well at the same time.
In everything you've just described, there's a lot of rules. So I want to get into the rules of the game. You also touched on some of the market dynamics impacting JLL. What is the top tailwind that the company, that the industry has? And what's the unwritten rule that you're leveraging to seize that opportunity?
Well, the tailwinds we're tracing are anytime there's a economic downturn, people look for what? How can we do things more efficiently? And if you look at any organization, you look at the most, the items where organizations spend the most money: people, technology, and space. So we're in the top three. So when we can help people do that, it's very, very important. So you have the situation now where return to office is a big issue, okay? I personally believe that people should come into the office, particularly women and minorities, because that is the way you get some of those unwritten rules, so you can watch what's going on. You can integrate that into your own activities and well-being. So those are some of the tailwinds. And another tailwind, which we are really taking advantage of, is technology integrated into real estate. We have an organization called Spark, where we actually put hundreds of millions of dollars a year that we invest in companies that are basically, we call it real estate tech. Everything from sensors in the seats to know who's coming into the office, to making sure that the waste is taken care of in the appropriate manner, their technology to do all of these things. So those are some of the tailwinds that are helping us. And then again, it all starts, I want to go back to this forever: mission first, people always.
What's the barrier on the flip side? What's the barrier, the top barrier to profitable growth, and your unwritten rule to navigate that?
Well, some of the barriers we face are obviously when interest rates go up, capital is more scarce to go into real estate. That is certainly one. The fact that we've had remote work means that there is less demand for office space, and people have to look for places to be efficient. So we have to find a way to do well in expanding markets as well as contracting markets. That's certainly it. And I'm going to tell you one that we always focus on: people. There's a war for talent. And one of the things, even though we're in a phenomenally challenging time from a geopolitical perspective on people, making sure that you have a workforce. I just got a phone with a client that happens to be African American, that's making a decision on who to hire. And one of his criteria is, I want a group to work on my account that looks like my organization and my aspirational goals. So people.
In this environment, is that still important? There's different kind of narratives in the country right now, and in other parts of the world. Your perspective?
Well, you mentioned the boards that I'm on. So in addition, USAA, and I'm also one of the governors of the American Red Cross, national organization. I'm also vice chair of the board at United States Military Academy at West Point, our alumni association. Each of the boards that I'm associated with, they are consistent with my values. And my values are that we need to create an environment where all people can be what they can be, okay? So with that, what is changing is the narrative of how you do it. Now, you can be stubborn and say, I'm going to have my chief diversity officer, we're going to do this, and we're going to have objectives for people to go. That is going to be tough in this environment. However, you have to make sure that the underlying values of the people that you're working with is consistent with this idea that all men and women are created equal.
Using this word consistent, let's stretch that to enduring, because your career has been enduring. And so is there a consistent written rule and unwritten rule that has served you in your success as a leader?
Well, let me start with the unwritten rule. And my kids give me a rough time about this. And I always say regulations are guidelines. Okay, so you start with that. Now, you have to understand that there are certainly parameters, but if you do everything the way that everybody else does it, you're never going to be differentiated. So how do you differentiate yourself and keep it as something positive? So that's one of my unwritten rules, that regulations are guidelines. And in terms of things that I do, and I'm going to say one of the best things I do for everything I've done, it comes down to relationships. And this is the way I look at relationships. I give a speech. Kids come up, they say, I want to network with you. Now, networking at its basic tenet is very good. However, networking is very transactional. You do something for me, I do something for you. What I've done since I was 16-year-old, I told you I was president of student council, I do something called connecting. When you connect with people, you're willing to do something for or with them without expectation of what you're going to receive in return. And when you can do that authentically, you can do that consistently, you form what's called a relationship. And you used a word that is so important, enduring. Relationships are enduring. Even with my clients, with my friends, something goes wrong and you have a relationship, you're able to work through it for the betterment of both people.
Let's get into the pivots, because whether it's in the corporate world at JLL or from your Army days, you would be accustomed to the voluntary and the involuntary pivots. Talk about a significant business situation where you led a pivot.
The leading of the pivot would be actually establishing this group within JLL called Public Institutions, okay? And I tell everyone the risk in everything you do, and in this instance, probably the biggest risk for me was a reputational risk. You worked on something, you had an idea, and it didn't work. However, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So I saw an opportunity for public real estate that they were not getting the same level of expertise and advice. And I basically went out, got the marketing department to put some pamphlets together for me, and I got on the street here in Washington and started going to agencies, and lo and behold, it worked. And when it worked, you know what everybody in the firm said? Wasn't that a great idea, Herman, what we did? When there was some resistance, because the government had this reputation of being hard to work with and there wasn't any money, we had some of the largest margins in the company come out of my business.
So how do you spot the signals? And whether it's from your training in the Army or in the corporate world, how do you spot the signals and develop your pattern recognition?
Part of the things that I do, and this really comes in handy in the board work, I've served on 7 public company boards over my career, and there's something to being a contrarian, okay? And to be a good board member, for example, I tell people, it's not about knowing the answer. It's not about how smart you are. It's about knowing what questions to ask. So the pattern recognition is looking at something, and I go back to President Kennedy's quote, don't ask what you can do, what your country do for you, what can you do for your country? And I look at opportunities like that the same way, saying, what is it that I can do? Because we come back now to that relationship that we talked about and being a connector. And when you're a connector, as in your business, you get a little information here, you get a little information there, you get a little information there. My view of the world is totally unique to me based upon, I sit on a board at USAA, I'm doing financial services. I'm in the American Red Cross, we're dealing with catastrophes. I'm with Fluence Energy, we're dealing with sustainability in battery energy. And you put all that together with your network, and it's a beautiful thing.
You talked earlier about sensors, technology, artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is the new norm. What is the biggest use case at scale that JLL is investing in? Tell us about that. What's the kind of dollars you guys are putting behind it, the outcomes?
Yep, I'll keep the dollars. I won't discuss the dollars, but I will say that we're definitely going into it. And one of the things we've done is definitely, we started with a smaller group with Copilot, right, to make sure that everyone can use it. And people are using it for scheduling, and I'm even using it now on some of my routine emails. I mean, it just saves you. I get 200 or 300 emails a day. Maybe 100 of them I really need to think about. And I can take about a minute and a half or 2 minutes. So that gives me almost another hour a day in productivity from doing it. So we're using it to, for example, do research on companies where we're putting proposals, right? And obviously we have a walled in. We're not putting all of our stuff out there for everybody else to use. So we're using it there. We're using it to look at use cases for occupancy in buildings, to understand how do you do the automated systems to make the lights and the heat and the HVAC come on and go off. And that makes sure for security purposes, for the lights when people walk by, for energy savings to make sure that you're not heating a space or cooling a space that no one is in. And we are making, I'm going to just say we're making significant investments. And I tell everybody about AI and all the boardrooms I'm in as well. It's one of the best things that's happened. It has the potential to be one of the worst things that happen. And it's very important that there be appropriate governance around use of it and making sure people aren't taking your information, putting it in ChatGPT, and your trade secrets are going out the window, et cetera, et cetera. So
how are your customers, your stakeholders responding? Talk about stakeholder experience, whether it's customers, partners, to what you guys are doing with AI.
You know what? They're doing what I do, and what I say is that when we make the pie bigger, let's decide how we're going to split the pie up in terms of the efficiency that may be gained. So people are starting to look at that. Some people are, and this goes with particularly people like myself, the baby boomers, that we're literate with technology, but we're a little suspect of it at the same time. So you got to say, they say all my data is out there and anybody can get it. And I say that there are two types of companies: those who have been compromised with their data, and those that are going to be compromised. So that's a real concern, and we've got with AI, I think that becomes even a bigger risk.
I want to talk a little bit about what I call the magic, and going back to what you talked about coming out of high school, going into the military. What's your definition of serendipity versus intuition?
Well, serendipity, in a way, is, I call it when preparation meets an opportunity. That's serendipity, okay? And the issue is, to use an old Army term, to be all you can be every day. However, there's a difference between working hard and working smart, okay? So the leverage of relationships, for example, one of the things that I think makes me valuable to my boards and to my company is that I have the ability to observe something, then I have the ability to pick up the phone, and I could probably call 2 or 3 people to help enhance my understanding of it, or to enhance a business opportunity or whatever. So those relationships are important. And I really talk about, very, very quickly, 6 characteristics that are critical for success. Interpersonal skills. That means being a lifelong learner so you can interact with people from all places. Being a great communicator. Communication, which you're an expert in, and that's what? Speaking, that's writing, that's listening, and it's body language as well. And then we talk about your analytical skills, both on a quantitative and qualitative basis. And one that I really focus on, and people should focus on, is leadership. And I define it simply as the ability to lead a group to accomplish a common goal. And then we take something that I've got it sort of naturally, risk-taking or entrepreneurship. You've got to have that for your career. You've got to have that for your business, and that's so important. And then last but not least, take a little bow of passion and put around those 5 characteristics, and you're going to have success.
So the aggregate of all of that crystallizes into what you talked about, your definition of serendipity, where preparation meets opportunity. Where has serendipity played a critical role in a business outcome?
Well, I'm actually going to go back to serendipity, where I thought it was one of the worst things that ever happened to me, and it turned out to be actually one of the best things. And that is, I was recruited to play football at West Point, and I was a very good high school player. However, I probably wasn't that good that I was going to go into the NFL. And I had a coach, Homer Smith. A lot of your listeners will know his name. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. And he called me in one day and he said, "Herman, you're never going to start in the Army-Navy game." That was one of the most disappointing days of my life. Since 6th grade, I played 4 sports in high school, okay? And since 6th grade, I'd gone to a sports practice every day. And what happened after that, my tactical officer is an individual at West Point that oversees a company. He said, I had very good peer leadership ratings, and there's something called Ranger School, and it's the most demanding, realistic combat training that the Army has. And the Navy has the SEAL training. And he said, Herman, I was voluntold, you're going to Ranger School. So I went to Ranger School, and as a result of that, gained the independence and desire. And what I learned from that training is your limits are not where you think they are, okay? It's not physical. It's here and here. And when you go through those very stressful situations, I can look back now and I'm having a bad day. You know what I say? I'm not in Ranger School.
On that notion of limits, what do you say to people when some external force wants to put an artificial ceiling, an artificial limit on your life, on your possibilities? You talked earlier about be all that you can be, right? That's a consistent in our conversation. What is that fortification process, building your armor? What's your advice when shielding or deflecting external forces that want to put limits on our life and our possibilities?
I probably spend some part of every week responding to that question in some way in terms of the mentoring that I do, first of all, to people inside the firm. And due to my profile, I get more entries for requests than I can handle just by the sheer numbers. However, particularly for the people inside the country, inside the company, the first thing I ask them to do, because if something happens, call Herman and see what you can do. First thing I tell them to do is let's do introspective analysis, because you can't fix a problem unless you know what the problem is. And many times, and we all have that block of we don't know that we don't know. Right. And that's the first thing I talk to people about, understanding that block exists. And then when you come to the realization that that is fair, then let's talk about the facts and the circumstances that resulted in this challenge or this particular point in life that you're at. And then you say, okay, we're going to backwards plan. Another military concept. This is where you want to be. This is where you are now. What are key intermediate steps in between that you need to get to so that we can get from where we are to what this desired outcome is? Number one. Number two, self-pity is the devil's work. Okay? Life is not fair. And you're going to have things that are not going to go your way, and you're going to get a strike called when it was really a ball. Okay? You can't take your ball and go home and say, I'm not going to play. You have to have that perseverance to say, okay, I got it, and I know I'm going to get some bad calls from here and there, but I'm going to keep the mindset. I'm going to use those 6 qualities that I talked about earlier, okay? And I'm going to persevere through it.
You've touched on it, but to conclude, what's your advice on how to cultivate the CodeBreaker mindset?
I think to summarize it, I would say it's very important to understand that rules and regulations are guidelines. So that starts with not putting yourself on a track that you've got to do what society or everybody else expects, right? But you've got to be within some norms anyway. That's number one. Number two, the importance of relationships. No man or woman is an island. Any success that you and I have had, it's been the result of input, support from others. And ask yourself, we all know someone that's very, very, very talented, but they have other characteristics that you say, oh, he or she, they're good, but then you have other people that may not be as talented, but they're fundamentally, authentically good people. And you want to do what to good people? You want to support them. So ask yourself how you can authentically be that person that people want to support, because you cannot do it by yourself. It takes a village.
Herman, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for supporting the CodeBreaker Mindset. For more episodes, go to www.chitranawbatt.com to like and subscribe. Connect with me on social media at Chitra Nawbatt.